We shall move to questions without notice. Are there any questions without notice? And I give the call to the honourable member for Capricornia.
My question is to the Attorney-General. My home state of Queensland has faced a devastating wave of youth crime. Given the very strong concern in my home state and around Australia about youth crime, will the Attorney-General now reverse the Albanese government's commitment to raising the age of criminal responsibility at a Commonwealth level and encourage state governments to do the same?
Order. Give the call to the Attorney-General.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I do thank the honourable member for her question. Youth crime, of course, is a matter that every single person in this chamber should be rightly concerned about. Certainly our government is very concerned about youth crime and very concerned about policing practice, very concerned about the laws which deal with youth crime and underlie prosecution for youth crime in our country, just as we are concerned with the detention of our young people in youth detention centres. And I fear that the member has not understood the discussion.
Order.
I fear that the member has not understood the matter which she raised in her question about the raising the age of criminal responsibility. The question of raising the age of criminal responsibility has been a matter of serious discussion, not a matter of serious discussion for many of those opposite, but a matter of serious discussion in the criminal justice system. All Attorneys-General are concerned with this, and that's why the matter of raising the age of criminal responsibility was placed on the agenda of the Standing Council of Attorneys-General when I recreated the Standing Council of Attorneys-General, which had been abolished by the former government, upon us coming to government in May last year. We will continue to discuss the question of raising the age of criminal responsibility. I note that some state and territory governments have already legislated to raise the age of criminal responsibility. Other state or territory governments have announced their intention to raise the age of criminal responsibility. Overwhelmingly, this is a matter that concerns state and territory governments, because overwhelmingly it is not the—
Herbert will cease interjecting.
I know that those opposite have got no actual interest in this subject, but if they would simply—
The member for Herbert will cease interjecting.
I include in this movement of the age of criminal responsibility the movement of the Liberal government in Tasmania, where they have changed—
Order. The Attorney-General will pause. Just get him to sit down for a moment and hear from the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Well, on relevance, the Attorney-General is advocating an increase in the age of criminal responsibility, and he should—
Yeah, I think the order. I'll deal with the point of order. The Leader of the Opposition is entitled to raise a point of order, but the Minister is directly referring to the age of criminal responsibility. So I'll listen carefully to make sure that he continues to be relevant, and he has the call for 28 seconds.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. There was a false premise in the question that I was asked, and there's another false premise that's been raised by the Leader of the Opposition in his non-point of order. The matter will continue to be discussed in the Standing Council of Attorneys-General.
Order. Members on my left will hear from the member for Blair in silence, and he has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. What feedback has the government received about Labor's cost of living tax cuts? What attempts have there been to prevent cost of living relief for Middle Australia?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Blair for his question and for his strong advocacy for the people of Ipswich.
Order. Members on my left will cease to order. The member for Fadden, the member for Groom will just cease interjecting. immediately.
Mr Speaker, our plan is aimed squarely at Middle Australia, helping low and middle income earners who are under financial pressure. Those opposite, of course, would never have thought of doing this, and they're already working on how to undo it. The reason it didn't cross their mind to cut taxes for low and middle income earners is because they simply don't think about them. Their gut reaction was to oppose it. Their first instinct was to roll it back,
interjecting.
and the first chance they get, they will walk away from Middle Australia. Now, they can change how they vote, but they'll never change who they are. Because always, and we saw it there last night with that rather extraordinary performance on ABC 7:30 program last night from the Leader of the Opposition. An extraordinary, angry performance. I think shorter assessment was given by Malcolm Turnbull during the Nemesis program, who, you know something's remarkable when Malcolm Turnbull can describe something in one word and one syllable. You know that's right. But he got this bloke right. He got this bloke right because we saw it last night, all the anger. No wonder they keep him away from serious interviews or from the National Press Club or from doing any proper forums. Because...
Member for Lyons will cease interjecting. The member for Moreton is warned. The member for Page on point of order.
Thank you, Speaker. Relevance. It was a Dorothy Dixer to the Prime Minister. But it wasn't a question to lash out at the opposition leader.
Order. The Prime Minister was asked about feedback regarding the cost of living tax cuts, so I'll just listen to him, and I'm sure he'll get order.
About each other. Very modest, Mr Speaker. Very modest. But the fact is that last night the feedback from the Leader of the Opposition was that he agreed that our tax cuts would help low and middle income earners. And when asked why he then didn't just keep the high-end stuff as well, he said, well, you can't do both. You can't do both. An assessment that gave a complete tick to the actions that this government have taken, which is maybe why they're voting for it, but arguing against it at the same time. Arguing against it at the same time. But Australians out there are saying positive things. Australians out there are responding because they know that this government had the courage to take the right decision at the right time for the right reason to make a difference for them.
Give a call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Yesterday, the member for Melbourne moved a shameful motion that attacked Israel and gave Hamas terrorists a free pass. Will the government today join the opposition in standing with Australia's Jewish community and condemn the Greens for their blatantly anti-Semitic behaviour? Or is the Prime Minister too dependent on Greens' preferences and Greens' support in the Senate to have the courage to do so?
Order. The member for Spence will cease interjecting. Order. Order. The Leader of the Opposition. The House is going to come to order. The manager was heard in silence. Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's a serious question in the context of the worst social disharmony that I have seen, not just in my time in politics, but in my time that I've been alive in this country. It shouldn't be weaponised. I condemn totally any form of anti-Semitism, including the comments by my local member, the member for Newtown, whose comments about tentacles with regard to the Jewish community. I find offensive. I find it had its origins in anti-Semitism, and I condemn it unequivocally. Just as I condemn forms of that I have seen. Islamophobic comments and behaviour as well. Now, Mr. Speaker, no one moved a motion in this parliament yesterday. There was an attempt to suspend standing orders yesterday. That's what there was. And when there's an attempt to amend standing orders, as someone who occupies the position of Manager of Opposition Business should know, that is the matter that is before the chair. Nothing else. Nothing else. And when
Order. The Leader of the Opposition. Look, the Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting. The Prime Minister is being directly... Order. Order. Members on my right. Order on my right and left. Prime Minister is being directly relevant and talking about the motion that he was asked about yesterday. I'm going to call for silence. Order. The Leader of the Opposition. The Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting. Order. The Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs is warned. Prime Minister in continuation.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. That was the matter that I understand was moved before this chamber, a suspension of standing orders from a member of a minor political party. I've got to say that when a suspension of standing orders is moved by the Greens political party, what I don't do is elevate it. What I don't do is elevate it.
Order. Order. The Leader of the Opposition. The Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting.
What I don't do also is come into the chamber when there are Mickey votes that aren't counted. I don't do it because for obvious reasons I have other things to do, other priorities. Other priorities.
Order.
Other priorities.
Minister for Health.
So, Mr. Speaker, if the test.
Order. The Prime Minister's time has concluded. There's far too much noise in the chamber. Members on my right, including the front bench, will cease interjecting so I can hear for order. I'd like to hear from the member. Order. The member for Wannon.
The Minister for the Environment made an unparliamentary remark. You did, and it would help the House.
Resume your seat. Order. Resume your seat. Call the Prime Minister on the point of order.
Mr. Speaker, the context of the interjections that are going across this chamber, I would have thought the idea that there's anyone on that side, I don't accuse them, and they shouldn't accuse anyone in my party of being anything other than totally opposed to racism in all its forms. In all its forms. In all its forms. In all its forms, including, of course, the rise of anti-Semitism.
I'll deal with this matter. If everyone can cease interjecting across the chamber, we won't be having this problem. I'd immediately called for order in the chamber. If ministers are interjecting and opposition members are interjecting, I can't hear them. So from this moment on, for the remainder of question time, cease interjecting. We won't have that problem. The House is in order. I'll give the call to the member for Corwell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the
member
Treasurer.
for Corwell will resume her seat. I'll call the minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm happy to withdraw. I'd love to see the return to order of the chamber.
I thank the Minister for assisting the House. Order. And we shall move on. Give the call to the member for Cornwall.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How will the Albanese Labor government's cost of living tax cuts deliver benefits for workers, communities and the economy, and what hurdles were overcome?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Thank you to the wonderful member for Cornwall for the way that she represents the 72,000 taxpayers who will get a tax cut in her community, 90% of whom will get a bigger tax cut because of our changes. Mr Speaker, our cost of living tax cuts are good for Middle Australia. They're good for workers and families and communities, and they're good for the economy. Every taxpayer gets a tax cut right up and down the income scale, and 84% of taxpayers get a bigger tax cut. 98% of teachers get a bigger tax cut. 97% of truckies, 96% of cleaners, 91% of police officers, 91% of mechanics, 90% of taxpaying women, regional workers, workers under 35 get a bigger tax cut because of our changes, Mr Speaker. These are the workers that those opposite have tried to dud and diminish, and they're still at it. They say they support our tax cuts, but their heart's not in it.
Member for Deakin.
We know this because the Deputy Leader said that of course and absolutely they'd try and roll them back. We know this because the Shadow Treasurer described bigger tax cuts as Marxism, Mr Speaker. If they really support these tax cuts, why are they still bagging them, Mr Speaker? Or if they think we're wrong about this, why don't they vote against them in the parliament? After 5 years and everything that's happened in between, all they can come up with is the old Stage 3 tax cuts that the member for Cook announced all those years ago. That's not a policy, Mr Speaker. That's a defibrillator. That's a defibrillator, Mr Speaker, trying to revive the Morrison government. They've learned nothing from their decade of division and dysfunction and failure in the economy. That's why their position on tax is indefensible and unsustainable, Mr Speaker, and that's why the opposition leader absolutely disintegrated on national TV last night. He doesn't understand that anger is not an alternative. He doesn't understand his nasty negativity is no substitute for economic credibility. Theirs is a recipe for higher inflation and lower wages and smaller tax cuts for the workers of Middle Australia. And, Mr Speaker, after this week, there are a few things have been made absolutely clear. Under this Prime Minister and his government, only Labor puts people before politics. Only Labor is the party of Middle Australia. Only Labor is the party of aspiration. Only Labor is the party of working people and their families and their communities. Only Labor is the party of bigger tax cuts for more people to help with the cost of living, and that's why we are so proud of the tax cuts in the legislation before the House.
And the House comes to order. Give the call to the honourable member for Wentworth.
My question is to the Treasurer. Young people in Australia are going backwards. In the last decade or so, a family headed by somebody over 65 saw their wealth increase by 50%, but those under 35 have barely moved. This can't have been the intention of government policy, and it's not the fault of older Australians, but it has created an intergenerational tragedy. Whilst I acknowledge the positive steps the government has taken to support young people, I don't think they're sufficient to close the wealth gap between younger and older Australians now or into the future. Does the Treasurer share my concerns?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the member for Wentworth for her question. I think it's fair to say there is always more work to do to make sure that we are delivering the kind of intergenerational fairness which is at the very core of the government's view of the world. And I wanted to thank the member for Wentworth for her genuine and informed interest in an area of particular focus for the government, and a passion of mine, certainly, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank her for the engagement when it comes to these really important intergenerational issues. Our mission as a government is to try and modernise the economy and maximise our advantages so that we can position our people as the major beneficiaries of change rather than victims of change in our economy, in our society. And that's really the motivation behind a whole raft of policies in the various portfolios represented along the front here, Mr Speaker. It's certainly the motivation behind the intergenerational report and the big focus on the 5 big intergenerational challenges and chances. It's certainly the focus of our human capital agenda, which we laid out collectively in our employment white paper not that long ago. It's behind our efforts to get the budget in much better nick so that future generations aren't carrying a disproportionate burden when it comes to the repaying the $1 trillion in Liberal debt that we were left to deal with. It's the motivation behind our housing agenda, trying to build more homes. It's the motivation behind the energy transformation, which I know the member shares a deep and abiding interest in. And it's also the motivation behind some of the newer things that we are trying in our portfolio and working closely with the minister here when it comes to trying to break the cycle of intergenerational disadvantage, particularly in communities like the one that sends me to this place to work on their behalf. Now, the intergenerational issues are also a big motivating force behind our tax reform agenda. Whether it's the superannuation tax concessions changes that we're proposing, whether it's getting a fairer return via the PRRT for our resources, whether it's multinational tax reform, tax breaks for energy efficiency, tax breaks for EVs, tax breaks for more build-to-rent properties, there is an intergenerational element to this, which I think is really important. And to finish with where I think the honourable member's question comes from, it's a big motivation behind the tax changes that we proposed this week and seek to legislate in this place. And I do understand that even after these important changes, it will always require the ongoing interest and effort from governments like ours to deal with some of these intergenerational challenges. But I also wanted to point out that our tax changes are much better for young people than the old Stage 3 tax cuts that they replace. 90% of people under 35, 98% of a younger cohort, as the PM reminds me, better for bracket creep, better for workforce incentives and better for our economy.
Time has concluded. Give the call to the honourable member for Chisholm.
Thanks so much, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. How will the passage of the Albanese Labor government's closing loopholes legislation provide job security and minimum standards for people who need it? How is the government making sure Australians earn more and keep more of what they earn?
Call to the Minister for Employment, Workplace Relations and Minister for the Arts.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and thank the member for Chisholm for the question. There's just over 80,000 taxpayers in Chisholm. They've already been getting pay rises, and thanks to the government's tax plan, they're going to be getting tax cuts as well. But today is a good day. Today is a good day for casuals, a good day for gig workers, a good day for truck drivers and people in road transport, and a good day for those workers who want to be able to know that when they're on their weekend and not being paid, they can enjoy their weekend. I'm pleased to report to the House, and this will make many members happy and make those opposite cranky, but it's probably a bit late to make them cranky. That happened sometime earlier on waking up or something like that. But a majority of senators have declared support to pass the Closing Loopholes Bill No. 2 today. I want to thank the Australian Greens for the negotiations that have happened there. I want to thank Senator Lydia Thorpe, who's been strong in backing working people. I want to thank Senator David Pocock for the work that he's done in working through amendments. And while Senator Lambie, we didn't end up reaching agreement on the bill as a whole, there will be some amendments, not all of Senator Lambie's amendments, but some that were negotiated and agreed amongst all of those who are part of the negotiations that we'll be supporting in good faith. It makes a palpable difference for workers who have had no minimum standards that they now will have some. Gig workers have had, when you say, oh, what's the minimum wage for a gig worker? There is none until this bill goes through. And it will go through, and gig workers in Australia will now know that Australia is truly a country where you don't have to rely on tips to make ends meet, where you don't have all your rights fall off a cliff because you don't make a technical definition of employment. In road transport, we've heard too many stories, including in parliamentary inquiries, of drivers under intense pressure. One driver, Robert Ireland, who reported 13 days straight on the road where he would have to apply himself 19 stubbies just to dissipate the effect of the methamphetamines that he was taking to meet the demands of work. Minimum standards on the road transport industry will now be possible.
Order,
and whereas previously,
members on my left.
Ask the National Road Freighters Association, ask NatRoad, ask the Australian Trucking Association, ask all the organisations that those opposite previously lined up with that have now been supporting this reform. And for casuals, your rent isn't casual, your mortgage isn't casual, your bills aren't casual, and if your hours are completely reliable, now casuals will have a pathway to permanent work. Secure jobs and better pay might anger those opposite, but it makes a palpable difference to workers.
Concluded. The member for Riverina will cease interjecting. Trust me, I can hear him. The call to the member for Hume.
My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to the Prime Minister and Treasurer's repeated refusals to rule out changes to negative gearing. Will the Prime Minister give a commitment to the Australian people that Labor's changes will include grandfathering of pre-existing negative gearing arrangements?
Order. The Assistant Treasurer will cease interjecting. Order. The member for O'Connor. The member for O'Connor will cease interjecting. Order. Members on my left and right, I've been crystal clear during the week. The time for interjecting is not before I call a minister or Prime Minister. Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, well, we've entered the twilight zone officially now. What we have before us is real legislation about tax changes before the Parliament. That's what we have before us.
Order.
And what we have now is the Shadow Treasurer asking for details about things that are only happening in his head, Mr Speaker. They're only happening in his own conversations.
Order.
With himself. Mr Speaker.
Order. Order. The members on my right, the member for Hume wishes to make a point of order.
Mr Speaker.
Look, the Prime Minister was asked a question about tax changes and negative gearing. I'm just going to ask him to return to the question. He's had a preamble for only 45 seconds.
Mr Speaker, I was going to make my point of relevance.
Yeah, I'm saying that the Prime Minister needs to. Yep. The member for Hume. Order. The member for Hume can have round two. Go for it.
Well, the Prime Minister has lied to the Australian people over 100 times, Mr Speaker. Why would anyone believe him on this?
The member for Hume, I think, knows what's going to happen next, and he may leave the chamber under 94A. Remind all members about parliamentary language. Now we have had one point of order. There will be no more points of order during this answer. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Well, he might have been on the early flight on a Thursday, but I don't think that was the motive. I think the motive is he is so embarrassed. He is so embarrassed by his own position on taxation that he can't even bear to sit in the chamber. So embarrassed that as Shadow Treasurer, we have a tax cut plan before this Parliament that is worth $107 billion over the forward estimates, and the Shadow Treasurer can't ask a question about it. Can't raise anything about it.Ent out there. He was asked. He already said no. He's already made it relevant.
We've already had one point on relevance, so it can't be. Well, if it better be a real point of order, or you'll go the same way. All right. Do this the easy way or the hard way, but I'll hear from the member for Deakin.
I'm entitled to come to the dispatch box.
And to take the point of order, and you may proceed.
The Prime Minister is defying your ruling, your order.
Resume your seat. Resume your seat. I'm going to deal with this. I said it was in 42 seconds and the Prime Minister was entitled to a preamble. It was far too early. It was far too early to call a point on relevance when the Prime Minister hasn't even got to his answer. So I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I reckon they probably saw the Leader of the Opposition on 7:30 last night, so they're all trying to bail out.
Order.
Mr Speaker, the Shadow Treasurer was asked me a question about tax, and he was asked a question about tax on the Sunrise program. It sums up exactly what their position is. So, do you want more support for people in the lower end? The Shadow Treasurer, no. No, they don't. They oppose what we're doing. They won't ask any questions about what's before the Parliament. All they're asking about is what's going on inside their own little head and inside their own discussions, inside the twilight zone in which they exist.
Give the call to the honourable member for Bendigo.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government. How is the Albanese Labor government responding to the economic times and delivering better tax cuts to support those living in my community and across all of regional Australia?
Give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Can I thank very much the member for Bendigo for her question. The member, of course, is correct. The Albanese Labor government's tax cuts are good news for Australian taxpayers living in the region, and that, of course, includes the 66,000 taxpayers living in the members' electorate of Bendigo, who will receive an average tax cut of over $1,424 from the 1st of July. It's a similar story all across regional Australia. 90% of regional taxpayers getting a bigger tax cut under Labor's plans. Labor's tax cuts are good for taxpayers all across the country, but they are particularly important for those of us who live in the regions. Regional Australians know that our tax cut is a better plan for regional taxpayers, and the only people who don't actually get that are sitting opposite me here. We recognise that a lot of people are doing it tough and taxpayers need relief, and that relief is exactly what our bigger tax cuts for Middle Australia will help to deliver. And we do know that when asked if the opposition would roll back Labor's tax cuts, we had the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. Well, this is our position. That is our position. This is absolutely our position. There's this funny little thing called TV. I'd have to say, Leader of the Opposition. This funny little thing called TV, Deputy Leader.
Order. The Minister needs to be heard in silence. There is far too much noise from the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. I'm just going to reset and make sure the Minister can be heard. She has the call.
Thank you. And so the Deputy Leader of the Opposition says this is absolutely our position. There's this funny thing called TV that captures that, so there you go. That is what the Deputy Leader of the Opposition believes, that our tax cuts should be rolled back and Middle Australia, particularly those in the regions, should actually be left behind. She's nailed the Opposition's colours to the mast, and now regional Australians know that deep down, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, a so-called representative of regional Australia, doesn't think our regions deserve a better tax cut. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition can stand up for whatever she wants on this side, but we're going to stand up for taxpayers in regional Australia. We're standing with the 76,000 taxpayers in Farrer who are getting an 87% bigger tax cut under Labor. We're standing for the nurse in Albury earning $73,000 who'll receive a tax cut of $1,504, $804 more than they would have received under your plan. We're standing up with the Woolies worker in Tamworth earning $40,000 who will receive a tax cut of $654, zero under your plan. Nurses, teachers, retail workers, casual workers, labourers, truckies, council workers, agricultural workers, the backbone of regional Australia that those opposite like to pretend they care about. When the rubber really hits the road, they don't care about them at all.
Give the call to the honourable order. The House comes to order here from the member for Dawson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government. Based on the government's secret modelling, can the minister guarantee that Labor's new tax on utes and cars will not increase the purchasing of a new SUV, people mover or ute in Australia?
Order. Order. Members on my right will cease interjecting. The member for Moreton will leave the chamber under 94A. Is on a warning, and time is not to interject before a minister speaks. The question was heard in silence, and so shall the minister. The Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government has the call.
Thank you very much, and I thank very much the member for Dawson for the question. And I'd like to start my answer with a quote. When fuel efficiency standards were introduced in the US, the most popular models before introduction stayed the most popular models after introduction, what we'd call utes. There wasn't a material change in price, and we don't expect there would be a material change in price here. Now, who said that? Who said that? You'd think it would be me, because in terms of the new vehicle efficiency standard, the impact analysis we've put out, that is what is in there. It could be Minister Bowen as well, also. But who was that? It was, in fact, the member for Bradfield when he released the draft regulatory impact statement for the fuel efficiency standards that you were going to introduce back in 2018.
Order. Order. Members on my right will cease interjecting. The member for Hasluck will cease interjecting. The Minister for Climate Change and Energy. When the House comes to order, I'll hear from the member for Lyons.
Speaker, my question's to the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories. How will Labor's new tax cuts provide cost of living relief to local government workers across Australia?
Give the call to the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question, a hard-working member who knows local councils in his electorate are delivering services to every local community. Labor's new tax cuts will benefit every Australian, from local government workers in the centre of our biggest cities to those who work in the most remote parts of the country. The 546 councils across Australia employ around 190,000 people across 400 different occupations. Local governments support our communities all around the nation. And, Mr Speaker, I'm proud to be part of a government that puts everyday, hard-working Australians at the forefront of decision-making. A council officer in the member's state of Tasmania earning $65,000 a year will now receive a tax cut of $1,304. Labor's new tax cuts will see a water and sewer apprentice working in Western New South Wales receive an additional $1,179 in their pocket come 1 July. In Western Australia, an urban environmental health coordinator on $125,000 will see a tax cut of $3,029. A graduate planning officer in regional Victoria, a much-needed role in all of our councils, will see on $75,000 a year will see a tax cut of $1,554. Mr Speaker, as a former mayor, I know how hard our local government workers are working. They deliver important services to every community across the country. Without our local council workers, we wouldn't see our rubbish collected, we wouldn't see our roads drivable, our parks and recreational spaces might not be fit for purpose. And I've seen firsthand during natural disasters that it is often council workers manning roadblocks. They're often the ones keeping our sewage treatment plants working and the water pumping to communities in essential times. And I want to acknowledge all of their hard work and commitment during times of natural disaster. These workers often go not properly acknowledged in our communities. They deserve a tax cut. They deserve to keep more of what they earn in their pockets. And under Labor's new tax plan, we are delivering for every local council worker across the nation and every Australian taxpayer.
Order. The member for Petrie will cease interjecting or be warned. The member for Canning has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. Can the minister confirm reports in an article by Andrew Tillett in today's Australian Financial Review about the minister giving a verbal dressing down of his secretary and the chief of the Australian Defence Force? Why does the minister blame officials for his own failures of leadership?
The call to the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister for Defence.
I thank the member for his question. It's an important question. The Department of Defence, the Australian Defence Force, is on a journey, and we are working very cooperatively with the senior leadership of the Department of Defence and the ADF in relation to that journey. But I make no excuses or apologies for demanding excellence and a culture of excellence in the Department of Defence and in the Australian Defence Force. And there is a way to go before we have that culture of excellence in the Department of Defence and the Australian Defence Force.
Order.
But having said that, I have some sympathy for where Defence is at, because the issues around culture in Defence today are a result of the 10-year tenure from those opposite. Because when you have seven different defence ministers over the course of 9 years, that is demoralising to Defence, and it has been. When you leave the oldest surface fleet in our country since the Second World War, that is demoralising, and it has been.
Warned.
And when you make $45 billion worth of announcements and you do not put a cent behind it, that is demoralising, and it has been. So there is a lot of mess to clean up, which this government is committed to doing. We are giving the Defence Force a strategic purpose. We are giving it direction. We are working closely with the Defence Force and cooperatively and well to improve the culture, but there is a way to go because of the mess that was left by those opposite.
Order. The member for Herbert was continually interjecting during that answer on a warning, and he'll leave the chamber under 94A. Give a call to the member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Speaker. My question's to the Minister for Aged Care and Sport. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to boost pay in female-dominated industries, including aged care, and make sure workers keep more of their hard-earned wages?
Call to the Minister for Aged Care and Sport.
I thank the member for Macquarie not only for the question but for the wonderful work that she does for her constituents, and particularly for the 67,000 taxpayers in Macquarie who will now receive the tax cut on 1 July. And that includes many thousands of aged care workers. The Albanese Labor government is proud to have delivered a 15% increase to the award wage minimum for aged care workers in this country after a very, very long time in the wilderness from those opposite. Day in, day out, our aged care workers deliver quality care for some of the most vulnerable people in our community, and for that we thank you. But, like so many Australians, hard-working aged care workers are feeling the cost of living pressures, and that is why we are ensuring that the people who care for some of our most vulnerable are being cared for as well, and they are now getting a tax cut. They can earn more and they can keep more of what they earn. Under Labor's plan, on 1 July, a registered nurse in aged care will now receive a tax cut of $1,679. An enrolled nurse will receive a tax cut of $1,214. A cook in aged care will get a tax cut of $1,166. And a home care worker will get a tax cut of $1,166 as well. Every single one of our valued aged care workers will be better off because of Labor's tax cuts. Better off because this is a government who cares about the people who provide care for us. Better off because we have already funded a 15% award wage rise for aged care workers, a promise we made with the community, a promise that has helped people like Elle, who has 3 children and who works by caring for home care package recipient Rachel, whom I met while door knocking in Chermside. Elle told Rachel that her pay rise meant that she could buy new school shoes for each of her 3 children. And now we get to tell workers like Elle that not only does she have a pay rise, but she is getting a tax cut too. A tax cut that will help her pay the bills, a tax cut that will help her put good food on the table, and a tax cut that helps her care for her kids. Now we can tell every woman taxpayer that the Albanese Labor government is delivering a tax cut for you. Yep. Under Labor's plan, aged care workers, childcare workers, disability carers are among the most likely to benefit, with more than 95% of female taxpayers to receive a bigger tax cut now. Yeah. That is what valuing workers looks like. That is what caring for the people who care for us and who are under pressure looks like. That is what doing the right thing looks like. Australian taxpayers do not want the confusion being offered by those opposite on cost of living. They want stronger, fairer wages, and that they will continue to receive under us.
Yeah. Give the call to the honourable member for Griffith.
Question to the Prime Minister. This year, property investors like you will receive billions in tax handouts from this Labor government, including from negative gearing, driving up property prices. Prime Minister, you talk about supply. New housing construction has reached a 10-year low under your government. You talk about Help to Buy, but will only help 0.2% of the 5 million renters. Will your government phase out tax concessions for property investors like negative gearing so everybody can afford a good home?
Order. There was far too much noise during that question. The Minister for Early Childhood, the Leader of the Nationals, I couldn't hear what the member was saying. Order. This works for everyone. The member will ask his question again so I can hear it.
The Prime Minister.
Just resume your seat. Order. If everyone can just stop interjecting for the remainder of question time, things will be a lot smoother. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. The member, of course, made a suggestion about you, Mr. Speaker, in the language in that question, but we'll ignore that. There are a range of measures that the government has put in place. We want tax cuts for people on low and middle income earners. That's one thing that you can do to help people. The second thing that you can do is increase rent assistance. We had the largest rental assistance increase in 30 years. But then there's other things that we can do as well in terms of supply. The foreign investment fees for housing measures that we put in place in my EFO in December is just the latest example of the measures that we've put in place. In addition to that, we have our housing accord. That included a new homes bonus of some $3 billion that to incentivise new planning that in some places is controversial. And I hope that the Greens political party talk to their local councillors about supporting just once, anywhere will do, just once, affordable housing in any community, including mine, because I'm yet to see the Greens political party support that, even award-winning medium-density housing in places that was the old Marrickville Hospital site in my electorate. The other thing we're doing, of course, is the National Housing Infrastructure Fund, very important. The social housing funding that we've put in place, including the Social Housing Accelerator, to increase.
The Prime Minister will pause. The member for Griffith on a point of order.
Point of order on relevance. We're almost 2 minutes into that answer and he hasn't once mentioned negative gearing.
Well, I know that may be what the member would like the answer to be, but when you include things like about the housing supply being a 10-year low, about benefits so everyone can benefit, it's a fairly broad question. So the Prime Minister is able to deal with all aspects of the question, not just one part of the question. So he is being directly relevant. If he wasn't talking about housing supply and the the issues surrounding the question, he wouldn't be relevant. But at the moment he is, so he has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. He's trying. We have then the Housing Australia Future Fund, something that those opposite delayed for month after month after month. Something they delayed and therefore delayed the building of housing for poor people and working class people in our suburbs and in our regional towns. In addition to that, of course, we have our Build to Rent program. That's a tax incentive, a tax change that we put in the last budget to encourage more investment in Build to Rent developments, because we understand that it can't be just the public sector. We need to encourage that private sector investment. We understand across all of this that the key is supply, and that's why we will, of course, continue to negotiate with the states and territories. At the moment, we're working through a National Housing and Homelessness Agreement, the major funding body over a period of time. We extended it by $1.7 billion for the additional year.
Time has concluded. Give the call to the honourable member for Spence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. How will the Albanese Labor government's tax cuts benefit the more than 75,000 Australians who work in the defence establishment, and what approaches have been rejected?
Call to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for his question and acknowledge his service in the Australian Army and his ongoing commitment to advocating on the part of the men and women of Australia's Defence Force, particularly those who serve at RAF Base Edinburgh in his electorate. Every member of the Australian Defence Force will receive a tax cut under Labor's tax plan. Every public servant in the Department of Defence will receive a tax cut. Every person working in Australia's defence industry will receive a tax cut, meaning those people who are serving our nation will take home more of what they earn. For example, a Lieutenant Logistics Officer at HMS Stirling in Rockingham will take home a tax cut of more than $2,500. A Lance Corporal at Free Brigade in Townsville will take home a tax cut of $1,861. In the member's own electorate, an Air Defence Guard at RAF Base Edinburgh will take home a tax cut of $1,876. And a Defence civilian worker at the School of Infantry in Singleton will take home a tax cut of $1,463, which is more than twice the tax cut that person would have had under the policy of those opposite. Not by word, but by action, it is now completely clear that those opposite support the call that has been made by this Prime Minister and this government in respect of tax. Because if it were different, they would be opposing the legislation in this parliament, and they would be doing what the Deputy Leader of the Opposition said they should do and roll this package back. The claims by those opposite that the Liberals are the party of lower taxes, that is not a tax policy. That is now just a pathetic whimper. And the truth is that it's not even true. In modern times, the highest taxing government in Australia has been the Howard Liberal government, because the reality today is that the modern Liberals are the party of higher taxes, deep deficits and big debt. Now, we understand that Australians are doing it tough with cost of living pressures. The only government which is delivering meaningful tax relief, which has delivered a budget surplus, which is ensuring our national security, is the Albanese Labor government.
The call to the honourable member for Fairfax.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question goes to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Can the minister confirm that the British version of the Mazda CX-30 is $19,000 more expensive than similar models in Australia? Is this an indicator of the likely impact of Labor's new car and ute tax? And will he admit that that vehicle's improved fuel efficiency falls well short of the 25% that he has been claiming?
Order. Order. There is far too much interjecting. The member for Cooper will cease interjecting. The member for Bruce is now warned. The Minister for Climate Change and Energy has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I can't begin to tell you how much I appreciate the question from the honourable member for Fairfax. I was surprised the first question got through the Taxes Committee on the fuel efficiency standards, but after the member for Ballarat's answer, I'm very surprised the second question got through, Mr Speaker, because what this government has done is put out a preferred position on a new vehicle efficiency standard to give Australians more choice of better cars, Mr Speaker. The other thing that surprises me is about how anyone could be against that, Mr Speaker. Giving Australians more choice of better cars to run. And it is the case. It is the case, Mr Speaker, that the Mazda CX-30 available in the United Kingdom uses around 20% less fuel than the most efficient Australian equivalent. The petrol Mazda CX-5 sold overseas uses around 25% less fuel than the most efficient version in Australia. The most efficient Mazda 2, you asked about Mazdas, happy to give you quite a few lists. The most efficient Mazda 2 sold overseas uses around 25% less fuel than the most efficient Australian equivalent. And I'm not the only person, I think we know where this is going. I'm not the only person who thinks this is the case, Mr Speaker, because the member for Ballarat, the Minister for Transport and I released a very comprehensive analysis.
We don't need props.
I'm going to table it, Mr Speaker. Comprehensive analysis on the weekend, Mr Speaker, which goes through very substantial analysis of the impact. And the Minister for Transport and I checked the precedent for doing that, and we found that the precedent was established in 2016 by the member for Bradfield, who released an analysis, and that led the member for Bradfield to make certain observations, Mr Speaker, of the impact. And he found, for example, that there are cars sold in the United Kingdom by Mazda that are more efficient than those sold in Australia. And that's what the member for Bradfield pointed out back in 2016. Do you chair the Taxi Committee? Do you let these questions through? I mean, I'm not quite sure how it happens, Mr Speaker, but the fact of the matter is that
the Minister will pause and ask him to address his comments through the chair as well while I'm at it. The Leader of the Opposition, a point of order.
Very much, Mr Speaker. On relevance, tellingly the minister makes no reference to the fact that the Mazda in the UK is $19,000 more expensive. He hasn't gone to that point. That is the crux of the question. Why is he applying a new tax to cars and utes in this country?
Resume your seat. Order. The Minister order. The Minister has been The Minister has been mentioning Mazdas, but I just want to make sure the Mazda he's referring to is regarding to the question.
Making the point that there are several Mazdas and other models that are more efficient overseas than they are in Australia, and we believe Australians have a right to access to those better, cheaper to run cars, Mr Speaker.
Order.
And we believe that Australians deserve the right
to
lower emissions, cheaper to run cars, and those opposite apparently don't. Well, that's the matter for them. That's the matter for them. They have a choice. They can stand against choice or they can stand for it. They can stand for better cars or they can stand against it. That is a choice that is available. The member for Bradfield and the former member for Keong tried it for 5 minutes in 2016 before they got vetoed. By the hard right of the Liberal Party. Well, this government actually will deliver better choice, with or without the help of those opposite.
The member for Fairfax asked his question, was continually interjecting. He's warned. No more interjections from the member for Fairfax. Please. Give a call to the honourable member for Tangney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to support teachers and public education in Australia?
No, the member will resume his seat. Question time is not going to operate like that. Members are entitled and should be shown respect when they're asking a question to be heard in silence. It's not the time for making jokes or smart-aleck remarks. It's not going to operate like that. It can't operate like that. Out of respect for the member for Tangney, he'll ask his question again and be heard in silence. The member for Tangney has the question.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Education. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to support teachers and public education in Australia? Thank you.
Call to the Minister for Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank my great mate, the terrific member for Tangney, for his question. Mr. Speaker, there is no more important job in this country than a school teacher. Everything they do helps our kids to aim higher, to work harder, to be braver, to believe in themselves. And I hope, I'm sure all of us in this chamber, in the public gallery, in the press gallery, can think of that one teacher who changed their life. We wouldn't be here as politicians or journos or ABC TV stars like the member for Canning if it wasn't for our teachers.
Order.
Who else would have taught him how to use that overhead projector? Mr. Speaker, we're providing a tax cut to all Australian taxpayers, including 300,000 school teachers. A teacher fresh out of uni on $80 grand a year gets a tax cut of $1,679. A teacher a number of years into the job on $95,000 a year gets a tax cut of more than $2 grand. Now, we need more teachers. That's what the extra uni places are about. That's what those $40,000 Commonwealth teaching scholarships are about. And we need to improve teacher training. That's what those reforms to the university course are about, to make sure that students at university come out of university with the skills they need to teach students how to read and write and do maths and manage disruptive classrooms. And we need to fix the funding of our public schools. And that's what the agreement that I signed with the West Australian government last week is about, making sure that we fully fund every public school in Western Australia by the start of 2026. And that's just the start. We've also got to make sure that we give a tax cut to every teacher in this country. And that new teacher on $80 grand a year that gets a tax cut of $1,679, that's double what they would have got under the Liberal Party. It's only happening because of this Labor government. And while we were working on that, what were they working on? They're working on their cameos for that true crime series on the ABC. What's it called? Nemesis? It's pretty wild, Mr. Speaker. I thought David Attenborough should have been narrating it. But that's the difference.
Minister, return to the question.
They're focused on themselves. They're focused on the past. We're focused on making sure that every Australian taxpayer gets a tax cut, including our 300,000 Australian school teachers.
Give a call to the honourable member for Mackellar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Attorney-General. In 2022, the minister announced the abolition of the AAT, stating that it had been fatally compromised by the stacking with Liberal cronies. But the new tribunal being proposed by the minister, while requiring merit-based selection of new members, will not require any independence in that selection process. Merit and independence are not the same thing. The minister will still have the power to handpick mates for these plum jobs. Why is the Attorney-General going to the great effort of creating a new tribunal if it is to suffer the same fatal flaw that saw its predecessor abolished? Thank you.
Call to the Attorney-General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for Mackellar for her question. And it is important to see the context that the member gave to her question. She is right to be concerned about the appointments process for the Administrative Appeals Tribunal and for the process for the new tribunal that we hope will replace it. This Liberal Party stacked the AAT with at least 85 former Liberal MPs, failed Liberal candidates, former Liberal staffers and other close Liberal associates without any merit-based selection process. This Liberal Party cared so little about preserving the actual or perceived independence of the AAT that they even appointed active Liberal-aligned lobbyists as members. The AAT's public standing was irreversibly damaged as a result of the actions of the previous government, and it's another mess that the Albanese government has to clean up. Since the 2022 federal election, this government has made approximately 115 new appointments to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, including the new president. Each of these members was appointed pursuant to a merit-based selection process. Each of those members applied for the job in response to a public advertisement and was assessed by an independent panel. And each of this government's new appointments to the AAT was endorsed by the panel as being suitable for appointment. There is no law that required our government to follow that or any other process in appointing AAT members, but that is what our government has done. The legislation that I introduced last year would abolish the AAT and replace it with a new administrative review body that is user-focused, efficient, accessible, independent and fair. And the legislation would require by law, as you mentioned in your question, Member for Mackellar, that members of the tribunal be appointed through a competitive, publicly advertised, merit-based process supported by regulations that set out detailed procedural requirements and selection criteria. We are committed to ending the stack, and I would welcome engagement with the member for Mackellar and other members of this House who are interested about what those detailed regulations should look like and about other aspects of the legislation. Before concluding, it is deeply disappointing to see that the Greens Party teamed up with the Liberal Party in the Senate today to disrupt and delay these generational reforms by delaying the committee inquiry process. We know why the Liberal Party wants to delay these reforms as long as possible. It's about protecting their stack. What I can't understand is why the Greens Party are prepared to back the Liberal Party's disgraceful attempts to delay a vital reform that will have a real and lasting benefit for the lives of thousands of Australians.
A call to the honourable member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence Industry. How will the Albanese government's tax cuts support Australia's defence industry, and why is this so important?
Give a call to the Minister for Defence Industry, Minister for International Development and the Pacific.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the fabulous member for Boothby from the great defence state of South Australia for that question. And I note that the taxpayers of Boothby, all 84,000 of them, will get an average tax cut of $1,592. The truth is, Speaker, that the defence industry is a critical partner to the Australian Defence Force as we enter a great period of strategic uncertainty. And that's why the Albanese Labor government is spending record amounts in the Australian defence industry, record amounts much greater than what was going on under the opposition leader. But we've been very open that one of the challenges is to attract and retain skilled defence workers. And that's why these tax cuts are so important. That's why these will make such an impact in helping our defence industry. A sheet metal worker earning $70,000 a year will get a tax cut of $1,429. A technician on $90,000 a year will get a tax cut of $1,929. A welder on $110,000 will receive a tax cut of $2,429, and an engineer or an electrician on $130,000 a year will receive a tax cut of $3,379. These tax cuts are great for defence workers. They'll help with the cost of living. They'll reward workers for their hard work in a vital industry. They'll encourage more careers in the defence industry and incentivise upskilling. Now, Speaker, I'm asked why are these tax cuts so important? They're important because it's critical to deliver the key ADF platforms we need to defend this country. It's critical to get the skilled workforce to do that. It's important to repair the damage done by the opposition leader when he was a defence minister, an opposition leader who allowed 28 major defence projects to run 97 years late.
The Minister will resume his seat, and the Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
On relevance, Mr Speaker, there's no reference to alternative policies. The minister made a threadbare attempt to justify this, but he knows full well this is absolutely straining the bounds of relevance. He should be directed back to the terms of the question.
The question was about why this is so important. I don't think that is necessary for the minister to give a critique on the Leader of the Opposition, but he'll need to explain to the House why the changes are important rather than just a criticism of the opposition. He has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And as I was explaining, it's critical to build and retain a skilled defence industry workforce to repair projects, get them back on track, because that's what occurred under the opposition leader. He had 28 projects running 97 years late and $6.5 billion over budget. It's important to get skilled workers because we had the last government spend $114 million on a naval shipbuilding college that trained 0 workers. 0 workers, not a single worker. It's important for these tax cuts to attract workers into the defence industry so that we don't repeat the opposition leader's mistakes of allowing supply vessels to not have safe drinking water for our brave sailors. This is the truth, Mr Speaker. Now the opposition leader is saying that the 100,000 workers that depend upon the defence industry don't deserve these tax cuts. The truth is, Speaker, the opposition leader can't be trusted on tax cuts. He can't be trusted on national security.
The call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, can Australians afford a $19,000 increase in the cost of an average family car under his government's new car and new tax? Will the Prime Minister give his word to the Australian people that a car and new tax won't increase the price of cars here in Australia?
Order. Members on my right, the member for Lyons will cease interjecting and the Minister for Environment will cease interjecting. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition's whole premise of the question is completely wrong. Completely wrong. And he should talk to the Manager of Opposition Business about why it's wrong. Because the difference is, as the Manager of Opposition Business said, if Australia had fuel efficiency standards in line with comparable nations, estimates of the fuel saving per passenger vehicle could be above $500 per year, or nearly $28 billion in total by 2040. He said that in 2017, Mr Speaker, and the member for Bradfield, I'm sure, can confirm that when he came up with this policy proposal, I, as Shadow Minister, sat down with him and said there needs to be bipartisan work done on this to get it done. That was my approach. And I note the Leader of the Opposition in a press conference in order to say, look over there, whilst they were reversing their position on tax cuts, said that he was up for reform. He said he was up for reform. And he said, just come to us, and well, I want to be constructive. I want to be like the Howard years. What nonsense.
Bringing people together.
And here we have a policy, one of the architects of which is sitting over there as his key tactician, but he asks stupid questions like that based upon nothing, based upon absolutely nothing. Now, this policy, let's be very clear here. This policy says that Australia will have the same standards that the United States has by 2028. Now, I don't know if anyone over there has watched TV or been in the US, but one of the things I noticed, well, yeah, apparently that's bad. Apparently that's bad as well, Mr Speaker.
Order.
Again, the noted bipartisanship. Well, you've almost worn out Gina Rinehart's plane, mate.
Order. The Prime Minister will say. The Prime Minister. The Minister for Resources will cease interjecting. The member for Deakin on a point of order.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. We know the Prime Minister's a liar.
Well, resume your
So he
seat.
should be relevant to—
Resume your seat. Resume your seat. Resume your seat. You'll come back to the dispatch box, withdraw, and then leave the chamber. You'll come back to the dispatch box, you withdraw that comment, and then you'll keep walking and leave the chamber.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I withdraw.
Order. Members on my right. Members on my right, I do not need any assistance. The Prime Minister for the remaining 25 seconds.
Mr Speaker, apparently now the offer of bipartisanship doesn't even extend to support for the US alliance. Like, everything is an opportunity. Everything is an opportunity to try to divide,
Order.
Point of order.
The Prime Minister will need to state the point of order. We haven't had one on relevance.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. On relevance, the question again went to a $19,000 price increase for a Mazda CX-30. The Prime Minister refuses to address that important question.
Resume your
Why
seat.
can't he?
Resume your seat. Prime Minister has 7 seconds and he'll remain relevant to the question.
Mr Speaker, well, having such a thin skin makes it easy to see the glass jaw, Mr Speaker.
The Prime Minister's
makes
time
it really
has
easy.
concluded. Order. House will come to order so I can hear from the member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and my question is to the Minister for Health. How will Labor's tax cuts make sure health workers keep more of what they earn? And how does this build on the government's actions to make healthcare more affordable and strengthen Medicare after 10 years of cuts and neglect?
Call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Robertson for his question. This talented young emergency physician we are so fortunate to have as part of our government and part of this parliament,
Order.
part of a growing team of qualified health professionals right across the parliament that are adding real value to our debate around health. I also noticed the member for Robertson, Mr Speaker, up just before question time, speaking in strong support of our laws that are designed to deliver every single taxpayer, every single one of the 66,000 taxpayers in his electorate, a tax cut on July 1st. And many of those workers, just like him, work in the health sector, like a third-year nurse at the Gosford Hospital, who under our laws will receive a tax cut on 1st July of more than $1,600, Mr Speaker, around double what they would have received under the old plan from 5 years ago. But as well as bigger, better tax cuts, the member for Robertson has also relentlessly campaigned for better and cheaper health care on the Central Coast. Indeed, that's why he ran for Parliament in the first place, because he saw the results of 10 years of cuts and neglect to Medicare every day he went to work as a doctor. His support for our bulk billing investments, Mr Speaker, saw more than 10,000 additional free visits to the doctor on the Central Coast in just the 2 months of November and December last year. His delivery of the Umina Medicare Urgent Care Clinic, Mr Speaker, is already making a huge difference to his community. One of his constituents, Greg, wrote to the member this, Mr Speaker. Brilliant service, Doc. Used this service last week. Was assessed, had x-rays, procedure done, wound cleaned and antibiotics in hand, all in the time it would have taken to find a parking spot at the Gosford Hospital. Get around it, people. 100% recommended. And, Mr Speaker, after the government, the former government, ripped away the right of general practices on the Central Coast to recruit overseas-trained GPs, the member for Robertson promised to reverse that decision, and we've delivered on that commitment as well, Mr Speaker. The member for Robertson understands it's not easy to turn around 10 years of cuts and neglect to Medicare, cuts and neglect that were begun by the Leader of the Opposition during his disastrous period as Health Minister. But the member for Robertson is working so hard to deliver for his community, delivering more doctors, delivering more free visits to the GP, delivering cheaper medicines, and on July 1, Mr Speaker, delivering tax cuts for every single taxpayer in his electorate.
call to the honourable member for Flinders.
My question is to the Treasurer. Were there any discussions held by the Treasurer or any direction given by him or his office, expressly or implicitly, to the Secretary or any other official of the Treasury to provide advice on Stage 3 tax cuts before the 11th of December 2023?
Order. The member for O'Connor. The Minister for the Environment. Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. An hour and 20 minutes into question time on the Thursday of sitting, in the absence of the Shadow Treasurer, that's the best they can come up with. I answered this question earlier in the week. I answered it accurately. The department answered it on Monday before the inquiry chaired by Senator Hume. And we all know what's happening here.
Order. The Treasurer will pause. Treasurer will pause. The member for Barker is on a warning. I thought it would be a week where he would not get 94A, but some things never change. You'll leave the chamber under 94A. The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I think the whole House knows what's happening here. They can't defend or sustain their position on the actual tax cuts, and so they're asking questions about all of the atmospherics and everything that goes around it, because the whole country now knows that they argue against the tax cuts but say they're voting for them. The member for Farrer says absolutely we're going to unwind it. They're all at sea. The opposition leader can't sustain his position for longer than 30 seconds on national television. We all know what's going on here. We have put forward a program of bigger tax cuts for more Australians to help with the cost of living. And if they don't want to engage on that, Mr Speaker, then perhaps they should pack up and go home.
Manager of Opposition on a point of order. The Treasurer has completed his answer. Order. Members on my left, the member for Longman, the member for Grey will cease interjecting so I can hear from the member for Lawler.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Could the Prime Minister outline the government's actions over the summer?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the Chief Government Whip for her question. And of course, she was a big supporter of the legislation introduced this week to give a tax cut for every Australian taxpayer and to make sure that these tax cuts were squarely aimed at Middle Australia to make a difference for working people. But that wasn't all that happened. We had the ACCC investigating pricing and competition in supermarkets.
Order.
We appointed Dr Emerson to do work as well on those issues, including the Food and Grocery Code of Conduct review.
Order. The Leader of the Nationals.
Over summer, all 58 Medicare urgent care clinics that we promised are now up and running. We had a major Border Force crackdown on the importation of illegal tobacco. We banned importation of disposable single-use vapes. We saw an increase in bulk billing rates as a result of tripling the bulk billing incentive, the biggest investment in Medicare that we have seen since it was first introduced 40 years ago, where we celebrated the 40th birthday of Medicare, which is so strong it even survived this bloke as Health Minister. So strong it even survived that. We improved metastatic cancer data collection. We had an agreement signed by the Education Minister for school funding in WA. We hope it's the first of right across the states and territories. We heard the result of our cheaper childcare policy has resulted in an 11% average reduction for centre-based daycare. We opened applications for the first round of funding for social and affordable housing under our Housing Australia Future Fund. We travelled to far north Queensland, to the Gold Coast, to provide assistance for people who had suffered from natural disasters, and we provided support in record time, and we provided support on the ground through the Australian Defence Force and other support. We announced
Order.
hydrogen hubs in Townsville and Bell Bay in northern Tasmania. We set national records for rooftop solar generation. And of course we have major progress on major infrastructure projects. The M1 extension to Raymond Terrace. The Rockhampton Ring Road is now under construction. The Orange Conservatorium is off and running as well. On Rocky, it took a Labor government to do planning. Nothing happened for 10...
Prime Minister's time has concluded. Give the call to the honourable member for Bean.
Speaker, my
I
question...
apologise. My apologies. Oh, okay. Just be a bit quick on your feet, that's all I say. Can I give me included as well? Give the call to the member for Bowman.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Champion Support Services and Thornlands work tirelessly to support those in my community who are experiencing hardship. They reported a tripling in demand for their food relief program during 2023. If Labor's policies are working, why are food bank lines in my electorate 3 times as long as they were a year ago?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Bowman. I thank the member for Bowman for his question, and it goes to the fact that many people on lower middle incomes, as well as people without work, of course, are under financial pressure. And that's why we're taking action. Those opposite would have done
Members on my
absolutely
left will
nothing.
cease interjecting. The member for Bowman has asked his question.
And one of the first things that you can do, of course, to provide people with assistance is to ensure they get access to a job. And we've done that, Mr Speaker, with more jobs created on our watch than any new government in Australian history, 650,000 of them. And not only do we want more jobs, we want them to pay more. We want them to be more secure. And with the passage of the legislation across in the Senate today, that's precisely what we are doing. Yeah. Those opposite think it was okay for people who are delivering food to Parliament House here or engaged in the gig economy to have absolutely no minimum standards whatsoever. Nothing. That's what they voted for. Well, we want people to earn more. Yeah. We want people to be in secure work. Yeah. But there's something else that we want as well. We want people to keep more of what they earn. Yeah. And that is why we've introduced tax cuts to assist Middle Australia on low and middle income. Now, those people, do you think maybe that people on $45,000 a year and less should get a tax cut? We do. That's why we changed the unfair system, so that it can deliver for people who are under financial pressure. Is Bob speak about doing things timely? They worry about the fact that our tax cuts will come in on July 1, and then they say, oh, but 5 years ago we did something. Well, we are doing something as a priority to deliver so that every Australian will get a tax cut. In addition to the tax cuts, of course, there's other legislation before the Parliament that will assist 1.2 million people on modest incomes in terms of the Medicare levy, to either take them out of the system completely or reduce the amount in which they have to pay. That's what we have done. So we are about providing assistance. Those opposite complained, said they'd oppose it, said they'd fight it, said they'd roll it back. Now they say, oh, actually, we're going to vote in favour of it, but they would never have done anything like that.
Cool. Now I give the call to the honourable member for Bean.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister for the Arts. Why is documentary an important method of revealing the true nature of Australian stories? And what happens if these stories are not told?
Call to the Minister for Employment, Workplace Relations and the Minister for the Arts.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker.
like the member for Bean, I love a good documentary.
Order.
Love a good documentary. And we'd actually flagged this in our cultural policy, where we particularly talked about the national broadcaster. And it says on page 87 of the national cultural policy, the national broadcasters are the platforms through which audiences engage with some of our best comedy, drama, documentary and children's television. Comedy, drama, documentary and children's. Nemesis gave us all four. All four. I don't want to be interrupted by a star of the show.
Order. The Leader of the House will resume, and the Deputy Leader of the Opposition will have a real point of order, not a statement, not a joke, not a comment. If she does, there'll be consequences.
Mr. Speaker,
the Deputy Leader of the Opposition has the call, and out of respect for her office, I would give her a call. Give her the call.
Mr. Speaker, on the basis that this is rubbish, I move the member no longer be heard.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition has moved that member no longer be heard. I put the question. All of those opinions say aye. Aye. Against no. No. I think the noes have it. Division required. Division required. Ring the bells for 4 minutes. Andrew. Lock the doors. The question is that the minister be no longer heard. The ayes will pass to the right of the chair and the noes to the left. I appoint the honourable members for Grey and Parkes as tellers for the ayes and the honourable members for Werriwa and Bean as tellers for the noes. Order. The result of the division is ayes 46, noes 83. The matter is resolved in the negative. Just ask members to return to their seats as quickly and as quietly as possible. Members can return to their seats as quickly and as quietly as possible. Order. The Minister in The Minister has the call.
As you were saying, yeah.
The Minister has the call. The Leader of the House.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. As I was saying, the true nature of Australian stories needs to be told, and we saw with Nemesis in only the first 2 episodes that we've had so far that when they say what they're like in terms of taxes, we saw the first thing they did when they got into office, put taxes up and flatline wages. We saw when they talk about their concerns about industrial action, we were reminded when they didn't like Malcolm Turnbull, they went on strike, shut down the entire parliament because they didn't like their boss. And we then saw, with all the complaints we watched last night about the ABC from the Leader of the Opposition, that it's actually the one network that has provided a program where no one other than members of the Liberal and National parties is heard. No one else says a word, and it's the most devastating thing for the Liberal and National brand you could ever see. But I know there's 3 episodes, but I think we're hoping for a 4th. I think we're hoping for a 4th, because the we have. I know Star Wars was episode 4, A New Hope. This could be episode 4, Thug, where we get to see the reality of what's said versus what happens. Because last night the Leader of the Opposition said we are more united than ever in the Liberal Party. Nobody is looking backwards, and he's right. Because except for the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, the member for Riverina, the member for New England, the member for Hume, the member for Petrie, the member for Canning, the member for McPherson, the member for Leichhardt, the member for Deakin, Senator Cash, Senator Reynolds, Senator Birmingham, Senator McGrath, except for them, no one's looking backwards at all. Not one. Absolutely none of them. The Leader of the Opposition also said they're a united party that since the election is 4 members smaller in terms of losing the former member for Aston, the member for Calare went to the crossbench, the member for Monash and Senator Van. 6 front benches gone, 2 of which he doesn't have the courage to replace. But it ended with a cliffhanger. Episode 2 had the cliffhanger, he's going to smile more. And we all know how that ended.
The call to the order. To the call to the Prime Minister.
On that note, Mr Speaker, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.